After weeks of witness testimony and shocking reveals inside the Manhattan courtroom, the criminal case against Sean Diddy Combs is now in the hands of a jury. 12 men and women will now decide if Combs is guilty of running a criminal enterprise, sex trafficking women, and transporting individuals for prostitution. I'm criminal trial attorney Sara Azari, and this is Serving Justice, where we will break down this crucial final day before the jury began deliberations in the trial that has captured the nation's attention. I'm joined today by NewsNation digital reporter Safia Samee Ali, who has been following this trial since the very, very beginning. Safia, thank you so much for being available a little earlier than usual today. Boy, today was kind of significant. We thought the case was going to go to the jury and, we're going to have a little break for a day. But interestingly, I want to start with the first and most serious count against Combs, which carries a 5-year statute of limitations, meaning the jury must find that Combs's racketeering conspiracy continued beyond September 2019. In other words, the jury must find a crime, I call it the hook crime, he committed in the last 5 years, which is the federal statute of limitations, in order for the racketeering statute to reach back decades at a time to all these other predicate acts that we heard testimony about. They also must be unanimous on at least one specific instance for the sex trafficking charge. So break this down for us. Why is this so significant in terms of the instructions?
Well, the statute of limitations, that's under law. For RICO, you have to have, it's a 5-year limit where if, and we can take a step back and talk about why that is. Now, statute of limitations, they're there in order to make sure that things are fair and things are done efficiently, where if you just let something happen and just kind of let it sit there forever, that's not very fair to a defendant who can essentially think I'm going to be prosecuted at any time. So what the law essentially tries to stop here is that basically it makes prosecutors move forward with investigations, investigators with investigations, prosecutors with whatever charges they want to bring, because as time goes by, Sarah, memories fade, evidence gets lost.
Witnesses die, or
witnesses die. Exactly. Yeah. The integrity of an investigation gets lower and lower. So that's why with the statute of limitations, you're making sure that you're pushing through and getting the most integrity in an investigation. So now here in this case, this 5-year limitations is super important because, this is why Jane is so important.
Yeah.
This is a really tight timeline. Yeah. Cassie and Diddy broke up in 2018. That's before 2019. So they need, and Cassie's the big witness here. She's like, in my opinion, she's going to be, that's what they're going to get her on. And so in order to get Cassie,
if they get him on sex trafficking, it would
if they get him on sex trafficking, 100%. In order for them to be able to reach back and get everything that happened with Cassie, they need to have Jane, who opens the door with that 5-year, because Jane was with Diddy.
So that's really interesting, because remember we were talking about why even have her testify? She seemed like more of like a defense witness. There you go.
That's exactly right. I think that they needed her in order to open that door, because they couldn't get to Cassie without Jane. That's the bridge.
Correct. Okay. So it's unfortunate that we don't have Tommy with us, because number one, he's always brought so much layperson insight to this conversation that's critical, because that's what most of our viewers are wondering, but also because he was in the courtroom today and there was an issue with a juror. This juror is seated in seat number 3, but on the roster from the pool of jurors, this juror is juror number 25. And from what I understand, he is like a 51-year-old. I believe he's Latino. I'm not sure 100%. And he's a scientist. And the foreperson, who is juror number 2, is a white male, fairly younger. They're estimating, in his early 30s or so. He has been taking diligent notes, even when the other jurors stopped taking notes. He's just going. He's watching the trial like a hawk. He's very, very diligent. But he's also been responsive to Mark Agnifilo, laughing along at some of his, lighthearted arguments. He has nodded when there was testimony about how hardworking Combs has been in these sort of businesses that he's built in the Combs enterprise. So hard read on this guy, but he is the foreperson. He writes a note to the judge saying that juror number 25 has some sort of I don't want to say mental condition, but from people that have been in the courtroom, what I hear is that he has some sort of like a tic. He moves, in an odd way, which is to me like, okay, well, that's something visible. Like, why has this not been inquired into for 8 weeks? I don't know. It's $1 million question here. But essentially, the foreperson says, we don't believe that he can follow your honor's instructions. Not that he can't understand your instructions, but he can't follow them. So there was a lot of back and forth. The parties, each side presented their position to the judge, and the judge came back and responded to that note, essentially saying what judges often do with jury notes: go back and try, you're supposed to follow the instructions, do your best, follow the instructions. And this is interesting, Safia, because this is not the first jury issue we've had. Remember the guy that was supposedly from the Bronx, but then they said, no, he lied. He was really from New Jersey, which I had a problem with, because you could really have two residences when you're in a relationship. You could sleep over your girlfriend's house and still have your, Bronx residence. And now we have a second one. So these are like, we could potentially have a mistrial. So like, I was kind of, on my Uber ride here, I was kind of thinking through, looking forward. First of all, this guy could be a stealth juror, right? And we could be looking at a possibility of a jury nullification, the idea that the jury
100%.
could find him guilty but still acquit him. And also, if a juror refuses to follow the instructions like the judge admonished him to, the real options are, number one, to dismiss the juror under Rule 23 and 24 and replace them with an alternate. But that'll obviously create an appellate issue because of that swap in and out. Or declare a mistrial, and we'll have to start all over. The question will be, will the government recharge Diddy? And I think they will. So I think that either way, I think the defense should be feeling really good today over this jury issue.
I think so too. I mean, but you never know, Sarah. You don't know if which way he was going or what the issue was, because it was kind of this vague, like, we're concerned. I think the thing was, we're concerned he's unable to follow directions. That's concerning to all of us, to be 1 hour into jury deliberation.
Right
and this
away.
Guy comes out and he's just like, is he not cooperating? Is he saying, I'm not going to talk about, we have no idea. So it could be going both ways, but this is definitely very bumpy. I don't think, I feel like both sides would be nervous at this point. They'd both be like, which one is it for? Is he...
Yeah, but in my experience, usually, I mean, this is really early on, like you pointed out, Safia. And I think usually when there's an issue like this so early on, it persists. I don't think, judges are sort of, there's this pressure, number one, for juries to reach a verdict. They don't like to feel like they've done excuse my French, a half-assed job on their civic duty. They like to reach a verdict. There's this self sort of inflicted obligation or duty, right? On top of it, judges want them to reach a verdict, so that's why every time there's a potential of a hung jury, like, no, keep deliberating. Of course, this week we have a holiday, so I'm not sure how much the judge is going to say keep deliberating, but yeah, I mean, I think that, by the way, I think the judge was correct. I think that was vague. It's like, wait a second, it wasn't even an hour. It was less than an hour that they went back there, and they came back saying, we feel like, or whatever. It was not conclusive as to why. But again, people that have been visibly seeing this juror have noticed like a twitch, and which, like, if
how did that go under the radar this whole time?
Well, I don't know, but I mean, the demographics apparently are, I mean, the guy's a scientist, so he couldn't be, I mean, like, you can have certain physical responses and still be in good mental health to think things through and execute. So I don't know. I mean, I'd be hard pressed to think for 8 weeks that this just went like unnoticed by the judge. I mean, it's kind of strange. But anyway, I think,
do you think he is, I'm just really curious because do you think the judge, I know judges do not want to do this. He's going to avoid it like the plague. Cause I think the foreman said, can you interview him? Can you talk? And he was just like, no, I don't want to get involved right now. Do you think the judge, at what point do you think the judge is going to get involved? And he's just like, okay, I need to figure out what's going on here.
well, I think if this persists and the foreperson comes back and slips another note about an issue
Mm,
with this juror, you know, and is that um issue, for lack of a better word, is it just that he just is not agreeing with everyone else, or maybe the foreperson, or is it that he really doesn't understand the instructions? Those are two very different things,
that's true.
you
Do
know?
you
And
think this is
so
like a stealth juror kind of vibes? Are you, is
that's what
that
I'm
what you're getting?
saying. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. I'm saying this could be. It's interesting because we're talking about the skeptical woman, the African American with the big hoops, who's like
Yeah.
smoking. We thought she might be the holdout or the stealth, but it could be this guy. And in which case the judge could replace him with an alternate, which creates an appellate issue,
Yeah.
or it could be a mistrial. And imagine the defense has made so many mistrial motions throughout these 8 weeks at every turn, which was correct because it lays the grounds for appeal. But now at the very end, this could be the reason for mistrial. It's pretty fascinating to me. So one last question before we close for the day.
Yeah.
This jury also has to believe one act, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, for each charge occurred in New York. Because New York, it's the Southern District of New York that brought this case, which, by the way, I have an interesting insight about that. I want to ask you, have they met their burden of this jurisdictional component? But, when Diddy's homes got raided and there was that big to do and all that with the media, a very good friend of mine who's now a defense attorney, trial attorney, but at the time was the criminal chief of the Central District of California. So, like, my old backyard as
Mhm,
opposed to Southern
mhm.
District. He had signed the warrants for the raids of Diddy's LA homes. And to this day, I give him a hard time. And I say, why would you do that? What, like for Astroglide and baby oil? Like I mean, what, and so the
There were
jurisdictional
also guns and ammunition and drugs.
yeah, but look, the jurisdictional issue was interesting because he was telling me that this is just not the kind of case that Central District of California would have filed. This is very much a SDNY, thing, dish, specialty, I guess. So anyway, do you think that they have met their burden, that at least what did I say? One of the acts
Acts occurred in New York.
occurred in New York.
Yeah, I think if it didn't, we wouldn't even be here right now. I don't think we would get this far if we didn't pass that first hurdle. Jane
Uh-huh.
testified about freak offs happening in New York hotels and New York venues and flying to New York. And
Yeah.
so she specifically talked about this one incident in 2023 where she wanted to meet Diddy alone, but it ended up becoming a hotel
Oh yeah,
night
yeah.
and she called an escort. And Cassie obviously talked about many of these trysts taking place in New York. So jurisdictional, I think we're good. That's not going to
Yeah.
be a thing.
Yeah. And in terms of across state lines for the prostitution charge, we're talking
Yeah.
about what I remember is LA, Miami, New York. I mean, those are the areas, cities that I recall from testimony. So even though some of their favorite escorts were like in Atlanta or
Yeah.
wherever, but they weren't about to fly to Atlanta to the escort, so they flew the escort out to them. But regardless, it is prostitution across state lines. So anyway, Safia, this is fascinating, and I feel like we're gonna get a verdict before the July 4th holiday, don't you?
I do too. I do too.
Yeah.
This morning with juror number 25 definitely threw things off and the twists and turns continue, but I think so. I don't think anyone wants to be here any longer past
No,
the holiday.
I think the juries all, like, for the most part, they've made up their mind. They have a sort of a general gravitation towards one side or the other. I don't know how many of them for each side, but I definitely know this is split. I don't think that everyone unanimously agrees on every single charge or every victim. But I think that 8 weeks, and remember the 8 weeks, Safia, on the prosecution side were really more of the same. A lot of assistants just corroborating each other. You know, you had two different accusers with two different sets of like dynamics, but still it was like freak off after freak off. And it just was redundant to some extent. And I understand like everyone added a little piece, but when you think about it, it wasn't like one witness was a blockbuster witness. It was like the prosecution inched its way, you know, just built and built and built like bricks on top of each other until they got to the
I
end.
think
So,
Cassie was blockbuster. I think she was just like the POW witness.
Yeah, but she was the first one, right? She was the first one with that video, and that was like the shock factor. Like, what is a freak off? Oh my God, this woman's abused, you know. And then over 8 weeks, it's like, all right, you know. And I think they've made up their mind to some extent. And remember, the defense did not put on any witnesses, but today I was looking at one of their exhibits that they introduced when the prosecution rested, and they were presenting some exhibits. Oh my God, those text messages between Cassie and Diddy when they last had sex, where she says she was raped, they are really, really bad for her. Really bad for her. Like they completely cancel out any remote possibility of having been raped. I mean, have you seen those, Safia? Because I'll send it to you.
I haven't seen the text.
Oh, it's really bad. I'm serious. This is not Sara Azari, the defense attorney. I'm I just read them today and I was like, holy moly, no way she's raped. No way. Because he even said, oh yeah, because you got, another man FaceTimed you, blah, blah, blah. I mean, and remember, she really lost, she was a powerful witness, but she lost credibility for me at the end when she was like, I think it was 10 million, the settlement from the hotel. Like, how do you not remember 10 million? And this text message or text thread was like her downplaying another man that she's with, which was probably her husband, her current husband.
It was, right? Yeah, it was her.
Yeah.
This is the one where she said, like, I didn't think this was going to happen. Is that the one where she's like, I didn't want this to happen, but it happened.
But it was fun or something like Yeah, like not wanting it to happen, but then consenting to it happening. And then over time, regretting that it happened. That doesn't make it coercive. That doesn't make it.
You'll need one instance, Sarah. Just like we talked about earlier with sex trafficking, you need one instance of it being forced and coerced. Yeah, but
which is the worst instance for Diddy is the domestic violence at the hotel on video, which happened during the course of a freak off, right there in the middle of the night, whatever, early in the morning. I get it. But if this jury is looking at all this history of consent and is able to divorce a domestically abusive relationship from her consent to this lifestyle, I don't know that they're gonna, and I think they're also gonna be like, she made $30 million. She's good. Like, he doesn't need to be criminally punished for this. You know what I mean?
So, yeah, there's a social worker on that jury. There's a somebody who's a social worker on that jury. Okay. So I think the whole issue of trauma bonding and the history and all of that, that could also be a wild card where she can say, look, I get it. Even though she went back, there's a reason behind it. So really anything can happen.
But that's why I say on Cassie, it can very well be a hung jury because there is an abundance of consent. And then you have, some bruising on some occasions. And then that video, the rape thing, forget it. It's canceled out. I'm telling you, but I'll send you the thing. But you have that bad stuff, but then you also have all of this consent. So, I don't know. I don't know. And again, because we have that prostitution charge, I think it makes it easier for the jury to say, you know what, this guy, he was a bad guy, and he was definitely guilty of this. We're going to convict him on this. But we're not going to bother with these women that chose to be around him for whatever reason, whatever. You know what I mean? We got to be out of here. It's July 4th.
Yeah. Hopefully they can all come to an agreement on something, though. Let's see.
Right. We'll see. Anyway, this is fascinating. I'm like trying to figure out my life for the next couple of days. I'm like, can I make this appointment?
Just camp out outside.
People are asking me, like, can we do lunch? I'm like, I don't know. Depends on if we get a verdict. So anyway, we're all on the edge of our seats. Thank you so much, Safia, for joining me. And to all of you out there who've been following along, I really appreciate you. Speaking of watching, we are on verdict watch and we are going to stay on it until we have a verdict and probably beyond. Actually, we're already planning what we're going to do on serving justice after this trial is over. So thanks for staying with us in News Nation. And until tomorrow, the defense rests.